Hello, everyone. Verona, I see your presenter mode.
Just a second. Sorry about that.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar today. We'll just wait for a minute or two so people can trickle in, and then we'll get started.
I'll just reshare the slides. Give me a second.
Yeah, now it's good.
I hope the slides are visible, Vijay. Could you check?
Yeah, now it's good.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
Yes. We'll wait 1 minute more, and then we'll get started. Okay, let's kick off. Again, welcome everyone to the webinar today. And today we'll be talking about Verra's plastic program and especially the key requirements. I'm Vigil. I'm a senior program officer at Verra. I mostly focus on plastic policy and markets. I'm joined by my colleague Varun. He's a manager for the plastic program and energy industry program certifications. And so let me just next slide, please. I'm trying to control the slides from my side. Can you change the slides, Maru?
I changed the slide, Vijay. Is it not moving on your screen?
No, I can't see it changing.
Just a second. I think I'll just reshare it. Sorry about that.
Oops. So as we wait, I'll go through some housekeeping rules. Please note that this session is being recorded. If your continued participation will indicate that you agree to be recorded, we will share the recording afterwards on our website for the whole webinar and also the deck. And you are, of course, welcome to leave your camera on or off as you wish. And please note that all your microphones have been muted, but you are welcome to share your questions via the Q&A function. And we always welcome your questions and your feedback in general. And we'll try our best to get to your questions. If we run out of time, then please write to our inbox, and then we'll get to you shortly. We'll show you the email in a second if you don't know yet. It's plasticstandard@verra.org. Verra, how's the slides going?
Yeah. Is it moving now? It should be.
No, I can't see the slides at the moment. Do you want me to share maybe?
Yeah, if you could try that. Yeah, I think there's some error here. Just a second.
Okay, now it seems like it's coming.
Perfect.
Great. So for the agenda today, I'll first give you a brief introduction of Verra's plastic program, and then I will move over to my colleague Varun, who will take you through some key requirements that we get a lot of questions on. We'll talk through some key requirements for project regions and some methodology requirements on applicability conditions and baseline scenario and additionality. And we'll try to leave 15 minutes in the end for Q&A. And we'll share our inbox in a second and towards the end. So you're always welcome to send us your questions after the webinar. Next slide, please. If you're new to our program, please allow me to just give a brief introduction of Verra. We're actually a not-for-profit organization founded in 2007. We're registered in Washington, D.C., and today we have colleagues based all over the world. And on the right, you see our 4 main programs, and our focus today is on the plastic waste reduction standard, which is also our newest program. Verra's role is to develop and maintain environmental and sustainability standards and frameworks, and the aim is to help drive finance towards high-impact projects and to deliver real environmental and social impact. So currently, we have more than 3,400 projects active around the world, spanning across 125 countries. Next slide, please. A brief overview of the plastic program. The plastic program consists of 2 key elements. At its core is a plastic waste reduction standard and the supporting methodologies. Together, they provide a uniform framework for measuring and monitoring project impact, and also has a requiring compliance with a range of quality criteria, including social and environmental safeguard. And projects must demonstrate their compliance with our requirements through an independent third-party audit. And once certified by Verra, plastic credits can be issued. And each plastic credit represents 1 ton of additional plastic waste that has been collected from the environment or recycled. And there are 2 types of plastic credits, as you can see on the right, plastic waste collection credits and plastic waste recycling credits. And it's also possible for a project to pursue both as if they can demonstrate their compliance to both methodologies. Next slide, please. Thanks. So here's an overview of the ecosystem of Verra's plastic program. On the top is Verra, we're a standard setter, so we don't get involved in project development or sales of plastic credit, but we are here to support you if you need help to understand our requirements or the process. And to participate in the program, a project must demonstrate compliance with our requirements and undergo independent third-party audits to verify their plastic collection or recycling outcomes. And Verra then will review the project documentation and also the audit reports. If the project gets approved, then Verra will issue the plastic credit based on the volume of the verified collected plastic waste or recycled plastic waste. And then these credits, along with relevant project documentations, will be publicly displayed on our registry. And plastic credit can be used by a variety of stakeholders, either to meet regulatory obligations or to make voluntary investment into plastic waste management. And the finance generated from the sales of plastic credits will go to projects to enable them to continue or expand their impact. Next slide, please. Our program is officially launched in 2021 in February, and up until now we have 24 projects registered. And you can see there are projects also in the process from basically all continents of the world. And next slide, please. So today I'm only giving a very high-level overview, but I can share a couple of resources if you're interested to learn more. So here is a webinar that we did last year that really take you through an overview of how to develop a plastic program project. You can get to it just by searching our website or scan the QR code. Next slide, please. Here are some more resources. We always point people to the quick guides, as we call it. It's a developed project under Verra's plastic program. It provides a high-level overview of the project development process under our program. And the plastic program guide is also helpful, and it goes into a little bit more detail. Next slide, please. And these are the fundamental theoretical framework, as I mentioned before, the plastic standard, and the plastic waste collection methodology, and plastic waste recycling methodology. All of these are available on our website. And so today's goal is to take you through some key requirements where we get a lot of questions. Next slide, please. Now I will hand over to Varun, who will be spending the next 30 minutes or so and really provide a detailed overview of these key requirements of the standard and methodology. He will also shed some light on the intent and rationale behind certain requirements and really further inform potential project proponents and also against the different kind of project scenarios. He will also be sharing some examples to help you better understand these requirements. And over to you, Varun. And please remember
Thank you.
to share your questions through the Q&A function, and we'll get to them in the end. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Virgil. And thanks for setting the context and handing over to me. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to depending on where you're joining from. I know we have a global audience here. So I'll start with some of the core requirements for the plastic program, which are key in determining the eligibility of a plastic program project under the plastic program. So we'll start with project region, which is one of the key requirements that has a bearing on project eligibility. And the fact that a project can choose to define the project region depending upon the specifics of their project activity, as long as the requirements in the project region definition are met, it makes it all the more critical to understand this particular requirement better to be able to have good projects under the plastic program. So we start with the collection activity project region. So basically, the spatial extent that covers at least a geographic area that contains the source of the plastic waste and the project activity. And at the most, it could include a country or countries in which the source and the activity is located is the project region. That is how it is defined in section 3 of the collection methodology. And even for the recycling methodology, it's in section 3. So project region is just not the geographic area of location of collection center or the material recovery facility or the collection points. So normally we see that project proponents misinterpret the project region as just the geographic area of where, say, a collection center is located or the collection points are located, but that is not what the project region consists of. So project region actually is something or the geographic area that includes both the location from where the plastic waste was sourced. For example, if it's being collected from a river ecosystem, environment somewhere, a dump site, or anywhere like households, commercial entities. So it should include the geographic area of those locations, plus the geographic area of the collection center or wherever it's getting sorted, or from where it goes to its end destination. So it's also important to shed light on one key aspect here. So initially, the definition of project region also required the inclusion of the end destination of collected plastic waste. But as per a correction and clarification that we issued in August 2024, we revised the definition for the collection activity project region to only include the source of the collected plastic waste and the geographic area of the location of MRFs and the collection points. Moving on to the recycling activity project region. Similarly, we see often that the project proponents misinterpret the project region for recycling activity to just be the location of the recycling facility, no matter from where the waste was being collected from. But in this case as well, the region for recycling activities needs to be defined as the geographic area of location of the collection center, material recovery facility, and the sources of plastic waste where it was collected from, plus the location of the recycling facility. It is key to note here that all the requirements, like all the key eligibility requirements or the conformance needs to be demonstrated for the baseline scenario, the additionality, the applicability conditions of each methodology for the region that is defined by the project proponent. So that's why project region is a key requirement. So the way a project defines its region is going to have a great bearing on how the project will be able to demonstrate conformance with all of these core requirements. So it's important to bear in mind that the definition requirements of region are met, how you're defining the region, and you're able to demonstrate conformance with all the core requirements. We'll take two examples, two project scenario examples here for the collection activity project region and one for the recycling activity project region. So hypothetically, considering project A, which is collecting material Y, and considering this particular material has a collection rate of 75% across this country for project A, but a collection rate of only 20% in a particular state B. So if a project were to go ahead and define the project region in this particular case as the entire country, then it might be ineligible as it may not be able to demonstrate a key requirement, that's the baseline scenario, and also the conformance with the applicability conditions 8 and 9 of the methodology, and also it will find challenging to demonstrate additionality as well. But on the contrary, if you see that if the project was to operate in state P, where we see that the collection rate is only 20% as per the data available, then it may still be able to demonstrate baseline scenario and be eligible if it can meet all the other methodology and standard requirements. So it might be beneficial in certain situations to narrow down on the project region and ensuring that it can meet all the methodology and standard requirements. Similarly, taking a recycling project activity example. So similarly, project A with a recycling material Y, which has a recycling rate of 70%, say, across the country. And similarly, it has a lower recycling rate, which is, say, 15% in state B. So similar to the other example, if the project region was to be defined as the entire country, it may be ineligible because it will again not be able to demonstrate the baseline scenario, which we will go into the details of a little later. So we'll explain what baseline scenario is and also the applicability conditions. But yeah, the gist is that it will be ineligible. And similarly, if it defines the project region as state B, where the recycling rate is, say, a mere 15%, it may be easier for that project to demonstrate conformance with all the, I'd say, other requirements of the methodology. So in a nutshell, smaller, lower performing regions in certain situations may be beneficial. So it's always good to be very intentional about how the region is being defined compared to a country versus a state or a particular geography where the project is operating. It may always be beneficial. And we always welcome questions if you have any challenges ever. So feel free to reach out to us in interpreting the requirements. So yeah, we're more than happy to answer any questions. So moving on, we move on to the methodology requirements. We'll now discuss how the methodologies guide the project design, focusing on the intent behind some of the key, I'd say, non-negotiable requirements or the key requirements which are core to the methodologies. And without demonstrating conformance with those, a project cannot be eligible under the plastic program. So the first set of requirements that we'll delve deeper into are applicability conditions. So we start with the plastic waste collection methodology. So there are 11 applicability conditions in the collection methodology, and the methodology can be applied when the first 9 applicability conditions are met, and the methodology is not applicable when applicability condition 10 and 11 is not met. So why I'm going to this detail is because due to the paucity of time, it'll be difficult to cover all the applicability conditions here. So we will just cover a few out of the 11 applicability conditions in this presentation, just to cover some of the ones where we see most issues with interpretation and conformance. So we'll try to go into the details of those. And rest are also very, very important. So I'd just like to add a disclaimer that in addition to the applicability conditions that we cover here today, conformance with all the other applicability conditions needs to be demonstrated to meet the requirements of the methodology. So I don't want to give an impression that only these are important. All the applicability conditions are important and non-negotiable. So starting with applicability condition 2 of the plastic waste collection methodology, a collection activity could be a new or a capacity addition activity. So basically a new activity is new. So basically nothing was occurring in that particular project, in that scenario. So it's entirely a new set of activities that the project initiated, quite straightforward. But a capacity addition activity is the one which can result in increase in the total capacity of an existing collection activity. For example, if there's a collection activity, say, that started operating in 2019, which was initially collecting plastic waste from 200 households in a project region, but in 2024, it goes ahead, expands its operation, and starts collecting from additional 200 households, which increases its collection capacity, then that kind of an activity may be eligible as a capacity addition activity, and the start date of this particular activity would be in 2024, when it actually expanded its collection capacity. So those kind of things become eligible. In addition to that, there could be other sort of, I'd say, capacity expansion initiatives that a project would undertake. For example, if they procure additional vehicles for collection, grabbers, etc., which help in expanding the volume of collection. There might be a project that's retrieving plastic waste from rivers. So in those kind of cases, if they go ahead and install additional river barriers to retrieve more plastic waste, that could be another example of how a collection project could expand its collection. In addition to that, I would also like to highlight why defining the type of your activity or its classification is very, very important. The reason being that the baseline plastic waste collected amount, or we also call it as the crediting baseline, is defined based on how an activity is classified. So if a collection activity is a new activity, its baseline plastic waste collected amount or crediting baseline will be 0. And if it's a capacity addition activity, then the methodology in section 8.1 prescribes certain criteria and provides guidance on how the crediting baseline needs to be defined for such kind of activities. So it's very, very important to classify the activity correctly so that the quantification of net collected plastic waste is correct and meets the methodology requirements. In addition to that, start date of the capacity addition activity also should meet the start date requirements in the plastic standard. So there's a requirement that the projects must complete validation within 2 years of the project start date. So for example, if the project's capacity addition activity started in, say, 2023, then from that start date, the projects should ensure that they should be able to complete validation and plan their timelines accordingly. So these are a few, I'd say, caveats or few important things that we thought we should highlight regarding applicability condition 2. Moving on to the next applicability condition, which is applicability condition 3. We talked about a little bit about the source of collection activity, or rather the source of collected plastic waste, and how that's important in defining the region as well. And it is also one of the key applicability conditions under the collection methodology. So as per this applicability condition, the source of the collected plastic waste must be clearly identifiable, and it should also be justified with some kind of evidence. Like if a project says that they are collecting plastic waste, say, from a dump site or a river or, say, households, then they should be able to provide some evidence that demonstrates that the waste wouldn't have been collected in the absence of the project. So examples of sources could be environment, say landfills, some sort of households, businesses, any end destination that does not meet the requirements in applicability condition 7, which we will also discuss in the next slide. And one, I would say, common misinterpretation that we see in many of the projects is that material recovery facilities are also listed as a source. Like they are not the, so we'd like to clarify that material recovery facilities or any sort of aggregation sorting centers cannot be considered as the sources of plastic waste, because that is not where the plastic waste originates from. So basically the source is something where from where the plastic waste originates, and that is what needs to be identified as a source and demonstrated that the waste wouldn't have been collected. The evidence could include some kind of official government or local authority data, anything that's available in the public domain. There could also be third-party independent research and surveys which can clearly substantiate the source of the collected plastic waste and also establish that it wouldn't have been collected in the absence of the project. Any other data from any industry bodies, research bodies, or anything else. So these are just examples of evidence. These are not, I'd say, I'd say they're not very, very representative of what actually occurs on the ground. So they are just examples, and there could be other kinds of evidence that you could share, and they need to be assessed by the VPP. And if everything's good, then they are acceptable to Verra as well. Moving on to the next set of applicability conditions. So I'll be covering two here from the collection methodology, applicability condition 7 and applicability condition 10 together. The reason being that both of these applicability conditions deal with the end destinations of the collected plastic waste. Applicability condition 7 goes into the details of acceptable end of life destinations for the plastic waste that's collected by a project. It defines what kind of end destinations are considered acceptable, and these are the 5, I'd say, broad categories here. So there could be reprocessing. So if the collected plastic waste is sent for reprocessing, say into some sort of construction material, pavement tiles, bricks, or road construction, or other, say, commodities which have commercial value, and that is considered an acceptable end of life destination. The collected plastic waste could also be sent for mechanical recycling, and mechanical recycling could both be open or closed loop, where the collected plastic waste is reprocessed into recycled material. So that's also acceptable under the collection methodology. There could be incineration with energy recovery. So there could be RDF as a raw material that's derived from that plastic waste, or it could also be used as a source of energy to replace natural mineral resources and fossil fuels. So that's also an acceptable end-of-life destination. But an important thing to note there is that the energy recovery facility, wherever this plastic waste is being handled, must demonstrate successful end use of the recovered energy. So that needs to be demonstrated. Chemical recycling is also an acceptable end destination, and so are landfills. So when we say landfills, landfills must meet the criteria that is defined in applicability condition 7 in the collection methodology. It cannot just be any landfill, and we all of us working in this space know that landfills in many geographies do not operate as per the standards or bare minimum, I'd say, requirements for environmental safeguards. So there is a comprehensive set of guidelines that the methodology prescribes. So if a landfill can meet those requirements, it's sanitary, it's government authorized, approved, that might also be an acceptable end destination for the collected plastic waste. Important thing to note here is that compliance of all of these activities or all of these end destinations has to be demonstrated with local or national, I'd say, policies or regulations. So they should all be legally operating entities and should meet all the requirements that they are supposed to operate with. So on the other side, there is applicability condition 10, which basically defines what are the unacceptable end-of-life destinations for the collected plastic waste. In the beginning, I mentioned that the methodology is applicable if the first 9 applicability conditions are met, and if 10 and 11 are not met. So if any of these end destinations are being used in the project, like if the collected plastic waste goes for open burning, it's dumped on open land or water bodies, or it's incinerated without energy recovery, then the project cannot apply the methodology and it'll basically be ineligible. So it's important to demonstrate that none of this is happening within the collection project. So these are a few applicability conditions that we covered today for the collection methodology. And now I'll move on to the applicability conditions for the plastic waste recycling methodology. So some of the key requirements we'll cover here. And just to give a background, similar to the collection methodology, we have a set of recycling applicability conditions here. So there are 12 in this. We have 11 in collection. We have 12 in the recycling methodology. And again, in this case as well, the recycling methodology is applicable when the first 11 applicability conditions are met, and the methodology is not applicable if applicability condition 12 is not met. So again, the disclaimer that we'll just cover a few key applicability conditions to cover I'd say the common ones where we see most misinterpretation and non-conformance, non-conformances in the project. So we'll shed a light on a little bit of those. And again, a disclaimer that all the applicability conditions are important. So don't think that these are the only ones that need to be confirmed with or complied with. So starting with applicability condition 7 here, which is one of the, I'd say, key deciding criteria in the recycling methodology. So applicability condition 7 deals with the quality of the recycled material or the output of the recycling process. So it's key to meeting the requirements of this methodology. So basically, the quality of the recycled material that the process generates, recycling process, irrespective of whether it's chemical, mechanical, that should be of such a quality that it can be used as a feedstock to displace the use of virgin plastic. So basically, the intent here in the recycling methodology and behind this applicability condition is that we would like to encourage closed loop circular economy applications where the recycled material can displace the use of virgin plastic. So basically, under this applicability condition, to confirm with this, only the recycled material that can be used to displace the use of virgin plastic is eligible for waste recycling credits. Any fraction of, I'd say, the process, for example, in a chemical recycling process, once, say, you get an intermediate output as a pyrolysis oil, which then again has to go through certain processes to generate, say, polymer fractions, which can be processed into virgin plastics. Some might be used as pyrolysis oil or other chemicals. So just to kind of demarcate that very clearly, so any fraction of the output that goes into the manufacturing of other chemicals or is not utilized for displacing the use of, I'd say, virgin plastic will not be eligible. Only the fraction that can do that will be eligible. So there's also an exception in this particular applicability conditions, recognizing the challenges that exist in the plastic waste recycling space. We know there are a lot of composite materials. So this exception applies to the recycling of composite materials that contain plastic and other materials. So if there is that sort of a scenario, then such projects must demonstrate that it is sort of impossible to separate the plastic polymers from the composite material and recycle them independently. So that needs to be demonstrated to be able to apply this exception. Plus, the projects must implement a suitable application for the recycled material that is designed to be durable, say. So the methodology prescribes a lifetime of more than 10 years. So in these kind of, I'd say, situations, they have to be, and even for the entire conformance with this applicability condition, the projects could provide evidence such as contractual agreements. Say, for example, the recycled material is being sold to an entity X, which say manufactures some plastic products which are displacing the use of virgin plastics. So that should be made clear. There could also be any third-party audit, say certificates if the projects do that. Any survey results or any chain of custody certification that is duly assessed by the V. That's also acceptable. So moving on to the next set of applicability conditions for the recycling methodology, there is the applicability condition 8 and 10, which we also see are commonly, there are issues with these. So applicability condition 8 deals with demonstrating that there is recyclable plastic waste available in the project region that would not have been recycled in the absence of the project. So in order to demonstrate that, so we'll go into that. So basically for applicability condition 8 and 10, there could be similar kind of evidence. The applicability condition 10 deals with, requires the projects to demonstrate that the project activity is not competing with any other recycling activities or is not recycling plastic waste that may have been diverted from a historically existing, legally recognized recycling facility. Basically, the intent is to ensure that whatever plastic waste is being recycled, it wouldn't have been recycled in the absence of the project. So that's the intent behind these two requirements, and also to ensure that there's enough plastic waste in the region that wouldn't have been recycled. And the evidence that could be used to demonstrate conformance with these applicability conditions could be any sort of official government or local authority data, any sort of third-party independent surveys and research. There could be any academic research papers or any sort of other research that's published out in the public domain, data from industry bodies if it exists, or any other sources. Again, this is not meant to be very, I'd say, representative of everything. Like it may not be of all the different project contexts and different kind of data that might be available in different geographies. But yeah, this is just meant to give an idea. But yeah, there could be other kinds of examples or evidences that could be shared with the VVB. And yeah, if they are assessed by the VVB, we could also accept that. So these are also important set of criteria. And lastly, we'll talk about applicability condition 12, which is one of the applicability conditions which, if not met, then the methodology cannot be applied. And this particular applicability condition deals with the transboundary movement of the plastic waste. So basically, the recycling methodology will not be applicable where the plastic waste that is being recycled has been collected in or imported from other countries. But having said that, that is not a blanket, I'd say, a sort of ban or something. It doesn't prohibit that entirely. So we recognize there could be some scenarios where that is required. So there are exceptions to this applicability condition where if the project that's being the project that's recycling plastic waste is importing plastic waste from a least developed country or a small island developing state, that's a SIDS. So then that project might be eligible. So that's possible. So LDCs and SIDS generally don't have the capacity or infrastructure, and there are all sorts of different barriers where which do not make it very, I'd say, feasible to recycle plastic waste locally. So in those situations, it might be possible. Plus, another exception to this applicability condition is that the project imports plastic waste from other countries where there is insufficient plastic waste available to enable the development of recycling infrastructure. So that needs to be sufficiently demonstrated that the quantity of the plastic waste is not sufficient that would merit the development of local infrastructure. So that's also another exception to this particular applicability condition. So I'll give you two examples here. The first example deals with a scenario where I think we get a lot of inquiries like that, especially in the European context and even in the North American context, where there is a transboundary movement of plastic waste. So basically, a project recycling plastic waste in Germany, which has been collected, say, from other countries like Hungary, Belgium, France, and other countries, will not be eligible for waste recycling credits. So basically, it will not be eligible to apply this methodology for that fraction of waste that was collected outside of Germany. which is basically collected from other countries. So in that kind of a scenario, the methodology is not applicable. But a similar example where in a different set of countries, say a project is recycling plastic waste in Australia, where the waste has been collected from Vanuatu, which is a small island developing state, classified as that. So in that case, this particular project will be eligible for waste recycling credits for the recycled material. So these are two different examples we thought that would be helpful to bring out the contrast. So so this is all about the applicability conditions for the recycling methodology. And now we'll move on to another core requirement in both the methodologies, which is the baseline scenario. So the baseline scenario, you can find the details of this in section 6 of both the methodologies. And I'll quickly go into the details of what the baseline scenario means. Simply, baseline scenario could be defined as the without project or business as usual scenario. So if there was no plastic waste collection or plastic waste recycling plastic credit project, then what would have happened to that particular plastic waste collected or recycled? Would it have been collected? Would it have been recycled? And for the baseline scenario, an important thing to note is that a project is not required to quantify anything for this. Like, it's not a quantitative criteria, it's more of a qualitative criteria where a project sufficiently needs to demonstrate that the plastic waste would not have been collected or recycled in the absence of the project. So how you can do that? Maybe providing evidence such as collection or recycling rates in that particular project region, information or data on the mismanagement of plastic waste, or any other evidence that can demonstrate that without project implementation, the plastic waste would have remained in the environment, it would have been dumped or incinerated without energy recovery, or maybe whatever, like it would have been in the environment just. And for the recycling, simply the plastic waste wouldn't have been recycled to meet the requirements of recycling methodology. So that needs to be demonstrated. So there is an important, I'd say, nuance here. So there is the baseline scenario, and there is also the crediting baseline, or the baseline amount of plastic waste collected or recycled, which we touched upon a little bit in applicability condition 2 of the collection methodology. So there's an important distinction between the two. Whereas the baseline scenario, as I said, is more qualitative, and yes, it needs to be evidenced with some data, but it need not be quantified. The crediting baseline is quantitative, and it does require a project to establish a specific value to represent what was occurring prior to the project's new or capacity addition activity. So the guidance for this is provided in section 8.1 of the plastic waste collection and recycling methodology. So that can be looked into. But just to kind of allay any concerns or the confusion that normally occurs between these two, we thought it was important to clarify this. So moving on to two examples for the project baseline scenario. So we'll try to describe how they have an important bearing on the eligibility, and also it'll also bring in the nuance of how the region plays into the eligibility, which we covered initially in these set of slides. So in the example one, considering there's a project A which collects or recycles material X, but considering that the collection or recycling rate of this particular material is 75% across the defined project region. So in this particular scenario, this project may be ineligible, as it may not be able to demonstrate the baseline scenario. Basically, it will not be able to clearly substantiate that plastic waste would not have been collected, recycled in the absence of the project. Now, you might argue that 75%, there's still that 25%. So basically, since it's a qualitative criteria, so you may argue that the project is doing that 25%. So we've not seen any projects that have done that successfully, but we're open to maybe different interpretations as well. But yes, generally, if the recycling or collection rates are that high across that project region, then baseline scenario might be challenging to demonstrate. Similarly, taking another example, there's a project B where it is collecting and recycling material types X and Y. Say the collection recycling rate of material A, material X is 75% and 15% for material B across the defined project region. It may be ineligible for plastic credits for material X, as it may not be able to demonstrate the baseline scenario since the collection or recycling rate is high. But for material, the other material where the collection or recycling rate is low, 15%, it may be able to demonstrate the baseline scenario, provided all the other requirements are also met, and it might still be eligible. So so moving on to the next set of slides. This is the last set of, I'd say, core eligibility criteria, which is the most important I'd say, additionality of the projects. So projects are required to show that they are doing something beyond business as usual, which is also the intent of baseline to an extent, baseline scenario to an extent, but also it needs to be quantitatively in a way demonstrated with additionality that the project wouldn't have occurred in the absence of the credit finance that it is trying to channelize through the plastic credit finance. So the plastic program uses a stepwise approach to assess additionality or to provide guidance on how additionality for projects can be demonstrated. So the stepwise process proceeds and starts with the first step, which is the regulatory surplus, which is required for all the projects. That's the first step, and every project must demonstrate regulatory surplus. And after that, there are three subsequent steps, starting with positive list, then the penetration rate, and the investment analysis. So these are sequential steps that the projects need to apply, but all of these steps need not be applied. Say, for example, after demonstrating regulatory surplus, if the project moves on to the positive list, and if it is able to demonstrate additionality applying the positive list, then it does not need to go to the next step, that is penetration rate or investment analysis. So it's done. Like, additionality is demonstrated if it meets the positive list criteria, and yeah, the next steps need not be applied. But yes, if positive list is not helpful, like if the eligibility is not confirmed by that, it doesn't meet that requirement, then the project needs to apply the next step, move on to the next step, which is penetration rate, evaluate additionality using the guidance under the penetration rate test. And yes, again, if the project is able to demonstrate additionality using the penetration rate test, then it needs to stop. Investment analysis does not need to be conducted. But yeah, if penetration rate is unsuccessful, you're not able to demonstrate additionality, then of course, investment analysis is the last and final step, which needs to be applied to successfully demonstrate additionality of your project activity. So both the methodologies, the collection and recycling methodology, prescribe this stepwise approach. They have some similarities, but yes, there are some specific criteria which need to be adhered to depending on the type of activity. So we encourage you to consider these as two independent additionality demonstrations for projects that contain both a collection and recycling activity. So they'll need to demonstrate additionality for both the activities using the specific guidance in each methodology. And also, there is another nuance here where we see a lot of confusion. So basically, in projects that are defined as group projects, which basically include different geographic areas, different sets of activities. So in those kind of projects where, say, there is state P, there is state Q, and there are multiple states and multiple activities occurring in different states. So considering and recognizing that the plastic waste collection and recycling scenario in different geographic areas will have different baselines, different sort of nuances. So in those kind of circumstances, additionality needs to be demonstrated for each combination of geographic area and activity type. So until now, we have not seen such a complex project or such an example within the plastic program, but yeah, in the future, there might be some. So it's important to flag that additionality demonstration needs to be separately conducted for such activities as well. So we'll now move on to the first step in the additionality demonstration, which is the regulatory surplus. So, which is basically demonstration that the activity proactively exceeds the existing regulations or a regulatory compliance scenario. So, for conducting regulatory surplus or demonstrating regulatory surplus I'd say conformance, projects need to list and analyze all the mandatory national, regional, and local laws which are applicable in the project region. So mandatory schemes may include any regulation, any law that could result in a legal redress, and those that enable authorities at those jurisdictional levels to take any action against these entities, the brands or say the recycling companies or whatever, any NGO or whatever it is, they basically need to comply. So there could be evidence such as compliance rates, collection recycling rates, or other relevant third-party data that can be provided to support the assessment of the effectiveness of regulatory surplus. And importantly, I'll move on to some very key updates that we made to the regulatory surplus demonstration requirements in last August, that was August 2024. So we released some corrections and clarifications, which are available on the Verra website, and they will be circulated as well. And also we've seen several projects applying this guidance successfully and have demonstrated conformance with the regulatory surplus requirements. And this is applicable since the date they were launched. So all the projects now need to adhere to this guidance. So the clarification deals with basically the inclusion of EPR schemes, which are sort of, I'd say, applicable or have been mandated in the project regions. So the clarification provides clarity on including all the mandatory EPR schemes relevant to the project region and the material types in that project region in the regulatory surplus assessment. So basically, projects need to consider all of those schemes, and the assessment needs to be conducted for each of the material type that the project is handling within the project. And also one important clarification that is a part of this entire exercise was to clarify that project proponents, which are also not the direct subject of an EPR scheme, for example, if the project proponent is a recycler and the EPR scheme only mandates, say, targets for brands or producers of plastic packaging, they should also consider EPR laws in their assessment. So irrespective of the subject or the entity for which the law is enforced, the EPR assessment needs to be conducted for the regulatory surplus. So the recycler must consider a mandatory EPR law in their assessment, whether or not they are the direct subject of that legislation. So basically, in terms of the outcomes, collection or the recycling of that particular material type that the project is dealing with would not be considered additional if it is mandatory, but that is not, again, a blanket or sort of a prohibition. If the project can demonstrate that despite having a mandatory EPR, the law or that particular regulatory requirement for collection or recycling of that material type is not fully effective, then the project activities could be considered additional and the project may be able to demonstrate regulatory surplus. So I would like to here maybe encourage all of you, perhaps we welcome any inquiries on this topic, as it is a very fast changing landscape and there are many nuances. We totally acknowledge that, and we are aware of that one EPR is very different from the other. It may be applied in a different way. So there are lots of context specific things that come into picture. So we are more than happy to help you guide the interpretation of the requirements. So feel free to reach out with any questions, any inquiries that you may have on this topic. So moving on, continuing with the EPR itself. So the second outcome in that scenario would be that just to define what fully effective means. So the law or regulation could be considered fully effective where it achieves its desired result. Maybe that it's successful in increasing the collection or recycling rates, or maybe it is enforced properly, but yeah, it could also be considered ineffective if it's not enforced and there is widespread non-compliance. So that could also be used as a grounds for demonstrating regulatory surplus. And also, it's important to reassess the effectiveness of the EPR scheme. Basically, regulatory surplus assessment needs to be conducted again at the crediting period renewal stage. And one last important aspect in regulatory surplus assessment would be that since there could be projects that which also comply with EPR, a part of theirs complies with EPRs and contributes to that, but under no circumstances a project can generate plastic credits for any amounts of collected or recycled plastic waste that has been financed through a relevant EPR scheme. So double counting is not permitted. So if financing has already been achieved or obtained from EPR, then that will not be claimed under plastic credits as well. So make sure that that doesn't happen. So these are a few examples for the interpretation of regulatory surplus assessment and EPR. So I'll quickly run through these. So in scenario one, we consider a PET bottle recycling project in country A, where the project region is defined as country A. The recycling rate of PET bottles in that particular country is 70%, which seems to be very high. And the EPR status is mandatory. There's a mandatory EPR scheme in effect, and it's also enforced. So the effectiveness in this case would be effective. So since the rates are very high, and as per the targets, for example, set, the scheme looks to be effective, then in such a scenario, the project may not be able to demonstrate regulatory surplus. But again, in scenario two, we have a different, say, a nuance to this particular scenario where there is a state P in this particular country A where the recycling rate in state P is only 30%. EPR status is still mandatory in state as well, but the effectiveness of EPR in this particular state, maybe it's not fully effective. It's slightly ineffective because 30% is not that high a recycling rate. And in this particular scenario, regulatory surplus demonstration may be possible for state P, but not for country A. And now scenario 3 is just a simple example where there's a PET bottle recycling project in country B. The recycling rate of PET bottles is merely 10%. EPR is not implemented. And even if, say, in this scenario, if EPR was implemented and there was a mandatory EPR, considering that the recycling rate of PET bottles was just 10%, the regulatory surplus assessment would have been successful. The project would have been able to demonstrate regulatory surplus despite having EPR. So these are a few different examples we hope would be helpful. And just another update on the subject of EPR. So Verra is also exploring how plastic credits can support EPR implementation in emerging markets and developing economies. And in this regard, we published a discussion paper in 2024 titled Opportunity for Plastic Credit to Support Inclusive EPR, and the paper deals with outlining opportunities for plastic credits as an innovative financial mechanism. You can download the paper from our website. It's available and go through it. And also, further to this, we are also currently finalizing another comprehensive technical paper that will highlight challenges that the emerging market and developing economies face in implementing EPR. We're also delving into some more detailed analysis, categorizing the EPR stages based on their maturity, analyzing opportunities for the plastic credit integration, and also recommendations for key stakeholder groups. So moving on, the next step in the demonstration of additionality is positive list. So projects are deemed automatically additional if they meet the positive list criteria. So there is clearly defined criteria in each of the methodologies. In the collection activity, if the activity is located in an LDC, SIDS, or a SUZ, they may be able to demonstrate compliance with the positive list criteria, and the project will be additional. Similarly, if a recycling activity is in a low-income country, in the rural areas of a lower middle-income country, or specific or is recycling specific formats such as monomaterial flexibles, or different criteria are there. You can go through these. This is quite straightforward. I would say easier if your projects meets any of these requirements, they'll be deemed additional. Moving on to the next step, that is penetration rate test, which is step 3A. So basically, the bottom line here is if the penetration rate for your particular project activity is less than 20%, then the project is additional. If not, then the project needs to apply the next step, that is investment analysis. So for both collection and recycling, there's a formula to calculate the penetration rate. For collection, it's the ratio of total annual plastic waste collection and total plastic waste generated in the region. But for recycling, while the formula might appear same, it uses the same CNG variables, but in recycling, the numerator is the total installed recycling capacity, which is different from collection. And also, the total installed recycling capacity is different from amount recycled. It is different from recycling rate. It's capacity, not what is actually recycled. So this is a mistake that projects make very often, that they use the amount recycled instead of total installed recycling capacity to demonstrate the penetration rate. But whereas for both of these penetration rates, G is common, like it's the total generation of plastic waste, it's the C, but the numerator differs. Important thing here is that the data or any, I'd say, data that's used for calculating penetration rate should not be more than 3 years old at the time of validation. So moving on to the last segment of our presentation or the slides today, that's the last test or the last step in the demonstration of additionality, which is the investment analysis test. So objective of the investment analysis is to demonstrate that project activity is not financially or economically attractive or lucrative to be able to sustain on its own. It may have negative cash flows or different kinds of things depending on different project contexts. And there is the tool, the CDM tool for the demonstration and assessment of additionality. So the option 3 of applying benchmark analysis is what is used as guidance to conduct investment analysis. So it's available online and it's also linked in the methodology. Project proponents basically need to select a financial indicator. So methodologies, both the methodologies provide specific guidance on how the indicator needs to be selected. For collection, it could be anything that's most suitable for the project context, but for recycling activities, projects only need to use the internal rate of return. So that is mandatory. And there are also options for the benchmarks that the methodologies prescribe to compare the financial indicator with, and projects are required to demonstrate that project activity had a less favorable indicator than the selected benchmark at the time of investment decision. And that's how additionality is demonstrated through the investment analysis. And also, investment decision date could be different from the project start date. So a project might start at a later date, but the investment decision, of course, would have been made at a much earlier date than the project goes on floor. So that's totally fine. So financial analysis, some more guidance should be standard based on market parameters. It should also include all the relevant costs and revenues, and the revenues, projected revenues rather, from the sale of plastic credits must also be included. Must be excluded. They should not be included in the investment analysis. And investment analysis should be conducted for the project life or at a minimum for at least 10 years. And it should include the fair value of the project activity assets at the end of the assessment period. All this is available in the methodology and also the CDM tool. So that must be referred to while conducting investment analysis. So as I said earlier, if the indicator is below the benchmark, the project is additional. But we'd also like to note here that in some of the project activities, for example, philanthropic activities, which are funded through grants or some sort of subsidies or something else, may mean that the project only has cash outflows, which could result in negative or incalculable IRR. So in those kind of scenarios as well, where the IRR is incalculable, it can also be used to make a conclusion that if it's negative or incalculable, it will be deemed to be below the benchmark and project activity could be additional in such cases. And lastly, most importantly, we require very transparent calculations, preferably in a spreadsheet, and also the documentation of assumptions so that the VVB and Verra can reproduce the investment analysis and evaluate it carefully to confirm its conformance with the methodology requirements. I know we are almost running short or behind on time. So lastly, that was the last requirement, and I'll leave you with this. So Verra registry serves as a very important resource. It could be very helpful to all the project proponents because it provides public access to all the public information, all the projects which have been successfully registered with the program. So we'd encourage you to go take a look at some of the projects in your geographies or a similar project context, and stakeholders and buyers can also review any registered projects on the Verra registry. So yeah, with that, I'll hand it over to my colleague Vijay to take us through the Q&A. Over to you, Vijay. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Varun, and thank you for everyone's questions. I've been trying to answer them in the Q&A section, but as we're really running out of time, I will just encourage everyone to please email your question to our inbox. I will pick a few hopefully quick questions for Varun to answer now, and we can maybe go over a few minutes if you're okay to stay. And of course, feel free to leave on time, and we will have the webinar published on our website afterwards. And so the first question, Varun, are all PET recycling projects in India ineligible under the plastic program?
Well, that's a great question. I think that's something we've been getting a lot, but I think it'll be incorrect to say that I would say not all projects can be ineligible. So as I mentioned throughout the slide deck, that there are certain requirements. I mean, there's a mix of requirements which have a bearing on the eligibility of the project. Most importantly, starting with the project region, how the region is being defined. So India as a country, in some of I think the challenge that we've seen is that might have very high recycling rate for PET plastic. So that's one of the things that we've seen. So in that circumstance, yes, if the project region is being defined as a whole country, it may be difficult to demonstrate conformance with the methodology requirements. But we also have 2 projects which are already registered, 2 PET collection projects which have successfully demonstrated additionality, met all the requirements. So we'd encourage maybe projects to look at maybe narrowing down the project region, considering maybe how they can, zero down on something more narrower and see if the project can meet the eligibility. But yes, saying that all the projects, let's say PET recycling projects in a particular country are ineligible would be incorrect, because there are different nuances that projects must evaluate on a case-to-case basis before making that sort of a conclusion. And yeah, we're happy to provide any guidance if there are any specific scenarios that somebody would like to maybe interpret in the light of our requirements.
Great. Thank you so much, Varun. And another question, can grouped projects be spread across multiple countries?
Well, yes, that's another great question. And yes, group projects can be spread across multiple countries. There is no requirement, or the standard does not prohibit group projects from operating across multiple countries. But there are a few caveats to it. As I also remarked in my additionality slides, that if there is a group project that's spread across different geographic locations, and in this case, if there are multiple countries, say 4 or 5 countries, then in such a project, the project will have to demonstrate conformance for all sets of, I'd say, eligibility criteria for each combination of, I'd say, the country and the activity. For example, a hypothetical example, if say there is a project that operates, a group project that operates in Nepal, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, say Pakistan, these 4 countries, and it has collection and recycling activities, then additionality will have to be demonstrated for each of these 4 countries separately. Applicability condition conformance will have to be demonstrated for each of these countries separately. The compliance with legal and regulatory requirements will need to be demonstrated separately, and so on. I mean, I can go on and on. So basically, the gist of the matter is that all the key core requirements need to be satisfied for each geographic area and combination of activity. So basically, it's possible, but then we would also like to just highlight that it might be very challenging administratively for the project proponents as well. So it'll just be like having 4 different projects in a single PD or a single project. So it might be administratively complex, but yes, possible. And also, you might also consider that how the VVVs would like to assess these kind of projects. It might also be complex for them to review it, but yes, totally possible. There's no requirement that would prohibit such a project.
Great, thanks. We'll do one more and then we'll have to close
Sure.
for today. So one more is our project started operating in early 2023. Would they be eligible under the plastic program?
Well, that might be slightly tricky, but yes, it could be eligible depending on when exactly it started operating. So the requirement in the standard says that the projects should be able to complete their validation within 2 years of the project start date. So we'll encourage you to maybe look at that requirement and see if your project can meet those kind of timelines. And in certain cases, there might be certain exemptions that may be possible. But when I say exemptions, I would always like to say that always take those with a pinch of salt, because there's very specific criteria, specific circumstances where exemptions can be granted. So maybe if you can look at that and evaluate whether you'll be able to meet those kind of timelines, then it might help. And yeah, the projects could be eligible still.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you for everyone for your questions and for staying till the end. If your question is not answered, please do write to us at plasticstandard@verra.org, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. And we are also planning to potentially do more in-depth webinars like this one periodically. So if you have other questions, please always feel free to write to us or suggest a topic that you want more information on, and we'll try to accommodate that in the future. Again, thank you so much, and we'll end the webinar here, and hope to hear from you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your patient listening and your questions. Thanks.